Get started. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Maria Zuber. I'm MIT's Vice President for Research, and I'd like to welcome all of you to this side event, Knowledge to Action, Co-Developing Local Solutions to the Climate Crisis. I'd like to start off by thanking our co-organizers, Pennsylvania State University and the American Geophysical Union, for working with us to host this panel today. I'd like to also like to thank our speakers for being part of what I know will be an important and exciting conversation, as well as Bethany Patton from MIT's Sloan School of Management, who's going to serve as the moderator today. And of course, I want to thank all of you very much for taking time during a very busy conference to be here with us today. Addressing climate change is a key priority for MIT. Our president, Sally Kornbluth, has called climate change the greatest scientific and societal challenge of this or any age. We are working now to create a new initiative to mobilize our entire campus in the search for new ideas and solutions to meet this challenge. Each year, MIT faculty, staff, and students attend COP to share what we know about climate science, its impacts and solutions. Just as importantly, perhaps more importantly, we come here to listen and learn from researchers, policymakers, community leaders, advocates, activists, and young people from around the world. I'm especially pleased that this year, 9 MIT students are attending COP28. We asked them to bring what they learned from this experience back to campus to share it with their peers. The reason this two-way learning is so important for us is simple. The ideas we come up with in a university setting, whether they're technological or policy or any other kind of innovations, they only matter in the practical world if they can be put to good use and scaled up. And the only way that we can know that our work has practical relevance for addressing climate is by working hand in hand with communities, industries, governments, and others. Ideally, this mutual work starts from day one, informing the conception and design of university research initiatives and projects, and continues all the way through piloting ideas and then scaling them up. Today, our panelists will talk about effective engagement between research and practitioners. What does robust engagement look like? How can we make sure that our students and other young people have a role in the co-design of research projects and co-creation of climate solutions? We'll have a chance to dig into these and other issues, and then we'll have time for a conversation with all of you. So I'm looking forward to getting right to the discussion, so I'll hand things over to Bethany to get us started. Bethany, thank you.
Thank you, Maria. And welcome everyone to this afternoon's panel. So we as a group here all agree that local communities really bear the brunt of climate impacts and exacerbating inequalities. And at the same time, communities serve as hubs to build resilience and guide solutions. Community-led collaborations between scientists, practitioners, and decision-makers can fuel climate literacy, capacity development, and solutions framing to address the climate crisis. Certainly, inclusivity in the climate solutions space is a widely supported imperative, and at this year's COP, we've witnessed quite possibly the largest youth delegation, heard COP President Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber affirm that a youth climate champion should be made an official COP role, and seen the first of its kind youth stocktake report. At the same time, we've witnessed the quieting of activist voices, although, I wrote these remarks before we just saw quite an incredible demonstration. And in order to avoid the mistakes of the past, we realized that all voices must be considered. In fact, some might call it arrogant to design a climate solution without including the voices of the front lines. Today's session will highlight examples where strong community collaboration fosters equitable local climate solutions. I'm joined by an inspiring group of representatives at the crossroads of climate science and community engagement. I'm going to kind of bounce around a little bit, but Joyce Menendez is an advisor for the United Nations Secretary General's Youth Climate Group and a social entrepreneur. Mark Ortiz, sitting next to me, is a presidential postdoctoral fellow and created and leads the Global Youth Storytelling and Research Lab at Penn State. Sergey Paltsev is the deputy director, he has multiple roles at MIT, but the deputy director at the MIT Joint Program on the Science and Policy of Global Change. Ben Zaitchik is a professor at Johns Hopkins University and a past president of GeoHealth at the American Geophysical Union. And Marcela Ángel is a research program director at MIT's Environmental Solutions Initiative. So I'm going to open by giving each speaker a few minutes to tell about themselves, and I've prepared a few questions to keep the conversation moving. However, the way that I usually like to run panels is that I like to see the panelists talk to one another, and so I imagine that what we've seen as they've met each other throughout the last few days, they have a lot to share with one another, so I really hope that as each of your fellow panelists are chatting, you take that as an opportunity to ask questions if something comes up, and chime in if there's something that really resonates with you. We'll try to leave some time at the end for people to ask questions. We have a mic runner, so we'll have that. And so with that, I'm going to open with Joyce. Hi, Joyce.
Yeah, thank you. I was just writing some ideas as well. Well, hello everybody, this is Joyce Mendez. So I'm originally from Colombia, but I grew up in the border of Brazil, Paraguay, and Argentina. Transboundary region where we call in Portuguese a terra das águas, the land of waters, because we have the Guarani Aquifer, which is one of the biggest water reservoirs. We have the Iguazu River that gives birth to the Iguazu Falls, and we have the Paraná River as well, setting borders with Paraguay and Brazil, that is also feeding the hydroelectrical plant of Itaipu, which is the second biggest one with installed capacity. So yeah, as a migrant, I realized that like the work in climate change, also like especially in the region, empowering migrants and as well youth refugee, it make a representation with our territory, but also a voice in the participatory methodologies, especially in public policies. And my expertise is on grassroots movements in Paraguay, in Brazil, Argentina, and Peru as well. So that's a little bit about myself.
Great, and also you have a pretty significant role with the UN, and so can you, one of the things that I just was hoping you could open with is just to comment a little bit on the process this year, and particularly around the youth engagement and the stock take, and to just tell us, do you think that, there's more to go? Where do you see us in kind of the progression of youth engagement over when it really started to gain traction in 2009?
Yeah, well, I see like youth engagement processes and tools have been increasing in the last couple of COPs in the way through youth ambassadors, also to increasing as well, and to see youth in some as delegates as well as negotiators of some countries. In some others, like still in South America, still have a long way to go. It is still a barrier to see youth not as a protester but also a decision maker. But in the other hand, I see more intergenerational cooperation in several processes. Like during these days, we have done a lot meetings, especially with ministers, especially from Brazil. In 2 years, we're going to host COP, and it's a big challenge as well to do it in the Amazon. So we've been working as well with the local, regional government, and at the same time, intragenerational cooperation, which is cooperation among youth organizations and constituencies. We have also seen an increase because we don't have time to create the wheel, right? Like we have several initiatives, like in the Brazilian Amazon, and then in the Peruvian Amazon, we're doing something similar. So we say, come on, let's sit down together, let's exchange good practices, and let's do it. So one tangible example that I can provide is that 2 days ago, we created the Just Energy Transition Coalition for the Amazon. And it's like youth, especially working in energy and electrification. So basically what we want to do is exchange good practices towards COP30 and increase electricity access and food security in the Amazon.
Great, thank you.
Welcome.
Mark, I'm going to switch to you. So Mark, you and Joyce work together, and also you are a youth activist yourself, and that sort of has led you to your research with the lab that you now run. So I wanted to kind of hear about what that progression has looked like and what the research you're doing in the lab looks like right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here with you all. And my name is Mark Ortiz. I really started my work in youth activism as a youth activist myself. I was one of the rambunctious college organizers that many campuses have, and I was really proud to be that. I carry a lot of that spirit with me. I'm very involved still in grassroots climate justice networks around the US and also globally. But I'm also an academic and a researcher, and so I wear all of those hats kind of at the same time. And in my role as at Penn State, I've started recently the Global Youth Storytelling and Research Lab, and we're trying to build a different model of intergenerational co-design, and intergenerational cooperation. So we have a 10-person youth advisory board, which Joyce is part of, and I'm very honored that she is. And we also have an intergenerational council of elders who kind of help support us, because one of the big gaps in a lot of these intergenerational design programs is that there's a serious gap of mentorship, real genuine mentorship, where elders are supporting and elevating youth voice and youth leadership, and affirming the kinds of questions that young people are interested in asking, the types of projects they're interested in pursuing in their communities, and the visions of social change that young people themselves bring to the table as leaders. I think that that's beginning to shift, because we've seen in the last few years massive mobilizations of children and young people around the issue of climate change, with Fridays for Future, the school strikes, but all of the work that's been happening even before those movements became kind of front page news. My PhD dissertation was actually about some of these movements that existed before the school strikes, and then moved into analyzing and interviewing young people who were involved with those as well. And what I was kind of left thinking about after doing a lot of interviews with young people in about 40 countries around the world was, how could we build an ecosystem or a network that connects youth advocates, who I think are among the best speakers, leaders on this issue, with the resources, the capacities of the university space. How can universities and researchers actually begin to co-design projects with youth advocates who are doing this work in their communities? And so far, I think it's been a very promising model. I'm excited to see where it goes.
So sort of thank you. So following along in that, Ben, I'm going to go to you next. You are both a professor at Johns Hopkins University and represent the American Geophysical Union. And as a member and past president of GeoHealth, in both roles, your work supports community science, and through AGU's Thriving Earth Exchange, which helps communities find resources, project managers, and experts to address pressing concerns, and through JMU's Baltimore Social Environmental Collaborative. So how are you seeing the importance of community engagement, sort of what Mark was talking about, in climate science at all levels, and how it informs your work?
Great, yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity. So perhaps I should start off by explaining what the American Geophysical Union is, since they're kind of a newcomer to this venue. So AGU is the largest society of Earth and space sciences in the world. It's truly a global community, members of from 148 countries, and it does the kinds of things you expect a scientific society to do. It supports journals, convenes conferences, champions scientific ethics, and provides career support. Within the context of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, AGU is probably best known for its members' contribution and the contribution of its journals that feed into the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change assessment reports and other climate assessments, but also importantly is championing open data and truly open science processes that are so essential, as has come up again and again the past 2 weeks here, in terms of democratizing the science of climate and climate action. Also pushing for ethical frameworks to address climate action in general and climate intervention specifically, which is another topic that, having not been at the COP for a few years, it's interesting to see how much that's being discussed. And in the past decade, AGU, to your point, has really gotten involved in a serious way in community science. And so the flagship of that is, as you noted, this initiative called the Thriving Earth Exchange, which I find to be a really effective and inspiring model for doing true co-generation of knowledge. The way the Thriving Earth Exchange works is that it begins with community voices. Communities come to the exchange and identify their priorities, their challenges, and then can be paired with researchers who want to have an impact who also join in the exchange. And then through that matchmaking process, we end up with a really co-designed process to taking on challenges. And these communities are from all over the world. There are examples of projects, for example, working on problematic land reclamation projects in the Philippines, where the community really wanted to understand how to work themselves with the science to understand and find better solutions, or water quality projects on rivers in the Dominican Republic. It was another successful project where, again, the community learned how to take the measurements themselves, but not just be informed on how to take the measurements, but how to really drive that process forward to find the solutions that made sense for them. Thriving Earth Exchange has been around for about 10 years, and for that time there have been 300 projects affecting communities with over 60 million people. So I think it's really a wonderful thing that's done. And the other thing that AGU does as a scientific society is realizes that this is not without risk for the researchers, particularly early career researchers who are trying to advance their careers. And for so long, this has basically been volunteerism. And so what AGU has done is created a journal for community science that allows for the publication of flexible formats for co-publication where the authors are from both the communities and from the research community, and that can then be a way to really do peer review, apply scientific rigor to the endeavor of community science, and elevate it to where it deserves to be, right? Because this is real research, and there's a continuum in which the researchers are both the scientists coming perhaps from a formal academic or research institution and the citizen scientists themselves. And so I think there's been a lot of great work done there. I just talked for a long time, so I'll stop there and maybe in follow-up and talk about some of my own work that's in that same spirit.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Marcela, I'm going to go to you. So as the director of the Natural Climate Solutions Program at ESI, you're really leading these collaborative efforts between researchers, environmental planning authorities, and community groups. Can you tell us a little bit more about your project and the importance of an inclusive community engagement process?
Thanks, Bethany. So first, ESI is the Environmental Solutions Initiative at MIT, and this is one of the many research groups at MIT that aims to mobilize the academic community towards global environmental challenges. So one of these challenges is the protection of natural carbon sinks, particularly in the global south, that are threatened by deforestation, illegal mining, urbanization into biodiversity hotspots, and these ecosystems are reaching critical tipping points. So the Natural Climate Solutions Program at ESI aims to support communities living in these carbon-rich and biodiverse ecosystems and working with them towards implementing sustainable development models that allow them to conserve these ecosystems while generating local income, wealth, and security. So we have developed an approach to work with these communities that combines technology development and community-based planning to help them identify some of the challenges and then partnering to develop pilot projects that can then be scaled up. And we have implemented this project at this time in 2 communities in Colombia, and we also have a regional project in Latin America. So the first of these projects is focused on monitoring climate risks. And in this case, we are working along local partners in a city in Colombia called Mocoa that suffered a devastating landslide in 2017, and we're working with them to develop a participatory landslide monitoring system. So collecting the data to be able to determine the susceptibility to landslides, but at the same time working with the communities to contextualize this information to be able to make decisions for the planning of the city. The second area where we have applied this model is focused on the Chocó biogeographic region of Colombia in a city called Quibdó. And here we're working with local youth in training and the use of citizen science tools and methods to be able to collect biodiversity data. And this is data that doesn't exist in the city and that could be a starting point for this city to start developing a biodiversity-based planning framework because it is located in one of the biodiversity hotspots globally. And the third area of work that I wanted to share today is work that we have been doing with Afro-descendant communities. And these are communities who have collective ownership of the land. And we're working with a network of Afro-descendant leaders in documenting what are some of the climate and biodiversity contributions of these communities that have been historic stewards of the land, but whose contributions haven't been acknowledged.
Great, thank you. And following on that, Sergey, you and I talked a little bit on the way over about the idea of bringing communities together with policymakers and decision makers. Can you talk a little bit about your work and also in the context of bringing all those people together and what that means when you can come to a solution?
Yeah, thank you, Bethany. How much time do I have? You never specified.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's dangerous because we are from academic institution. I can talk for 3 hours.
5 to 7 minutes.
Okay, sounds good. Well, first of all, thank you very much for attending. I know that you have a lot of different choices, and if I were you, I would be drumming those drums somewhere outside of this and making sure that we are bringing attention. Because one thing we need to make sure, coming back to this topic of knowledge to action, one thing I hope you all are going to bring back home is that we need to accelerate action. And we need to accelerate action at all levels. That means not just your policymakers, That means not just energy companies, not any other companies, but all of you. Because, well, I can tell you one thing. If we really want to make sure that we are achieving the goals of 1.5 degree, it means that a lot of things has to be done on the personal side, on the personal consumption side. Whatever choices you are going to make, whatever choices your relatives are going to make. And so that's one thing where we are trying to make sure that we are bringing the best possible science, the best possible knowledge to these decisions which are made at this very local level of your family, of your friends, of your neighbors, of your policymakers, and you are trying to tell them, we need to change. So I'll give you a couple of the examples. So she gave me only 5 minutes. I can talk many, many more examples, but I'll give you a couple of the snippets, a couple of the examples. I'll start with our example of the project in Bangladesh. Maria Zuber, who is sitting there and made a great introduction, she actually has done a great thing at MIT. We had something which is called MIT Climate Grant Challenges. And that energizes the whole campus. That energizes different departments where we all try to come up, okay, what MIT can to do in order to help with this solving the problem of the climate which is in front of us. And one of those projects is called CruiseNet, Climate Resiliency Early Warning System. And what's the idea? We actually have a project in Bangladesh in 3 particular small areas where we are trying to bring that knowledge. We are trying to help them with particular decisions which they are making today. And so Deb Campbell, who is sitting right here, so she is helping with the organizing a lot of different activities related to that project, because that combines policymakers, that combines scientists and economists like me, that combines, well, water specialists. And what we are trying to do, we are trying to find out, okay, what particular decision making we can affect. And we have chosen 3 particular areas. One of them, how to better design shelters. How to better design shelters when you have extreme events, how to help save lives. The second one, what to do with salinity, the issue of the intrusion of salinity. How do we help? How do we help choices into the future? Should they stay with rice agriculture? Should they go to shrimp farming? What are the issues related to that? And then the third aspect is what we call adaptation clinic, where farmers actually can go to a person and talk, well, what are the issue at hand? And when I was visiting Bangladesh in May, and well, it was much, much hotter than here, so it was 40 degrees Celsius all week when I was there. I was amazed. The local, our partner institution, which I also should have mentioned, BRAC, they organized these week-long interactions with the local farmers, local villagers who are dealing with these issues. And I was amazed by a lot of impacts which we already have. So, for example, I remember my conversation with a local veterinarian. He said, well, you think it's only about climate affecting our rice productivity? Well, our livestock, they're also already affected. So it's a lot of things which we need to bring together in order to address this issue. And you may think, well, guys, you're from MIT, you're like half of the way from the world. What do you know about kind of these local issues? How well do you know these problems? And that's exactly where you need to find a local partner. You need somebody who is day-to-day organizing meetings, organizing activities on the ground. I can give you another example. Again, I'm still hopefully within my 5 minutes, right? So whenever it's up, just call me. So I can give you another example where we are working currently with trying to promote sustainable farming in Brazil and Chile. And why is that? Because we are working also with the governments of Brazil and Chile in order to bring sustainable aviation fuels. Well, all of you flown to here, right? And all of you added some CO2. And so, well, we all are guilty a little bit of actually adding to the problem. So that's exactly what we are trying to resolve. We are trying to resolve that at some point in the future, when you are going to fly, you are not going to fly on the jet fuel which is emitting, but you are going to fly on sustainable aviation fuel. And we are working with the governments how to organize the feedstock, because you need feedstock, you need biofuels, you need sustainable biofuels to grow in order to produce those fuels. And so this is another example where you also try to connect the decision makers who has finance, who has investments, and how that is going to affect local communities which are going to grow these feedstock, which are going to solve these issues into the future. I can give you another example where we are trying to work, well, be careful, I'm going to say that, with energy companies. Why is that? Because we need to change their behavior. We need to make sure that they are making responsible choices. And there's a lot of controversy, and well, we are in the place, and well, we know, read all the news about the COP presidency, but this is what we need to do. We need to have the honest conversation, how to bring the best knowledge to change their behavior. I'm going to call another name here, who's one person who is in the audience, Mustafa Babekar. He was a researcher, and he was one of the modelers at MIT, and now he is helping Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to make much better choices in terms of what to do in the future. And so whenever I'm talking to government officials in this part, and I'm mentioning Mustafa Babekar, oh yeah, we know Mustafa, he's giving us very, very good advices, but that's another prodigy of MIT where we are actually planting the seeds, where we are trying to make sure that the very informed decisions are made. And the last point, and I'll stop here, I promise. The last point which I want to make is I'm really happy that, well, we have a representation of the new generation here, right? So all these goals about the net zero in 2050, well, probably I'm not going to be able to see if they're going to be reached or not. Hopefully I will stay another, well, 25 years or, well, something like that. But, well, that's up to you. That's, guys, up to you, because, well, you need to make that decision. You need to make sure that you're bringing that action. You remember where I've started. You're bringing that action to your families. You're bringing that action to your own decision making. And I'm going to make, well, another name call. Well, my daughter, Julia, who is here, she actually went, well, got her degree. She got an option to study at MIT, but she decided to study at Harvard for some reason. I don't know why. Well, at some point she said, Dad, I don't want to see you every day. Well, I'll better go to Harvard. She went to Environmental Defense Fund, and now she's at Winrock. And, well, they just signed an agreement with Brazilian State Mato Grosso, kind of, okay, to make sure that whatever they do that in a sustainable way. But I can't tell you an inside joke. Well, whenever I told her, well, she was younger, still listening to me. She's no longer listening to me, obviously. But whenever I told her what I'm doing for work, and I've told her, oh, we are working with these energy companies, we are trying to make sure that we are changing their behavior. Oh, she said, oh, Dad, well, you're a bad guy. You're working with energy companies? No, I'll do much better. I'm going to save the world in a real way, where I'm going to work with the indigenous people. I'm going to go to these places. And she spent a year in Indonesia, in the middle of Kalimantan, actually trying to work on a project how to eliminate the kind of illegal deforestation, the big project from Harvard again. Well, what else? But the point is, I'm happy to see these type of the activities where the young generation is picking up on the action and bringing that to the decision making at all levels. I'll stop here.
Great, thank you. I'm going to pick up on a couple of things that you said, and especially the one when you were talking about, oh, we're MIT, you know, what do we have to say about a community? I mean, it's not lost on me that we have pretty elite universities being represented, but Joyce, I noticed that you nodded your head in sort of an understanding around, we really do, you know, and I mentioned at the beginning that it's kind of arrogant to just bring an elite university into a community and assume we know the solutions. So I just wanted to, and Mark, I'd love for you to chime in on this as well, just wanted to sort of talk about the concept of engaging ethically and what that looks like, and if you've seen really good examples of that, and also maybe even some bad ones.
Yeah, perfect. So, yeah, well, perhaps I'm going to give first to two examples. So the first one is I'm analyzing also one has been said. One of the first kind of tangible actions that we got to do, let's say as youth researchers, because that's one thing. Sometimes you think about youth just protesting, but also youth, we are like great producers of data, and we know our territories. We're very creative. Like we catalyze action, and one of them is at UNILA, which is my university, the Latin American University for Integration. We have a lot youth from all Latin America, and I remember we were discussing a little bit about the geopolitics perspectives back in 2015, and we realized we weren't talking. Like with Mexico, with Brazil, we didn't know we have similar challenges. We didn't even know our energy matrix, but we didn't also know what the resistance or the good practices were. So in that way, we co-created the Latin American Observatory of Geopolitics of Energy inside the UNILA. And it gave us a lot, it was a great beginning because the university allowed us to have data information, but also to receive grants for research and also for extension activities within the community. And throughout the years, what we have done is that, as I described you, my region is very full of water resources. We have mapped the negotiations and the hydro policy actually with the energy plants, the hydroelectrical plants, as we see, for example, the case of Brazil and Paraguay. We have Itaipu, 50% on Paraguay, 50% by Brazil, but we have the same case with Argentina. And what we have done a work of and perspectives of scenarios. We have done the possible scenarios of cooperation, not what's best for Brazil, for Paraguay, or Argentina, no. What's best for the region in an integrative, cooperative manner. Second, we also have taught youth how to be a water or energy diplomat. I mean, that's very tough as well, because sometimes we tend to separate water here, energy here, and food there, although the Mercosur, that region is that nexus, the water and food nexus is very intertwined, and climate change is putting a lot of pressures, water crisis, increase of temperatures. And then we had a practical, very interesting case. I mean, it came out during pandemics. One of the colleagues, one of the members of the observatory, she's from a remote indigenous community from Peru, and she had to go back to her community. We didn't hear from her for 2 or 3 months. We were really worried, and then we realized she lives in a community that is 10 hours by boat to the closest settlement. And then she's like, guys, I want to be connected. I want to study. I want to continue my university. So we did a small project. We say, okay, we've been into theory, in that aspect of energy. Why don't we do something really practical? So in our group, we have energy engineers, students of economy and international relationships. So we did a crowdfunding to set up a small solar power system, battery, and satellite. So it was working. But then she had a community, it's a community of 40 families, right? So we increase ambition, and then we add internet access and electricity. We actually finalized the installation of electricity for a community of 40 families 2 months ago. And that was very challenging, because one thing is what you think, but another thing is, okay, how are you going to work with the community without being imposive, right? How is that dialogue when they not necessarily speak Spanish, they speak several other languages? It's a completely different reality. And besides that as well, how to engage partners, and what was said, to work with local partners is fundamental, because you don't want to impose perhaps your perspectives, your reality, but also to understand what is the best way to communicate, and also to make the community in a participatory way. So what we did, we had several participatory workshops. We did a full process as well of social cartography in order to understand what were the demands, what were kind of the weak and the strong points as well. And this sample is actually it had worked. So we want to expand it to other regions of the Amazon. We want to see how is this model on youth-led and student-led electrification progress and processes, and also taking into account universities. So it worked very, very well. Let's see, we want to expand it to the Amazon. So yeah, that would be the case I want to bring to showcase. Thank you.
And Mark, I know you have some thoughts about this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think part of my approach, and one thing that I'm always thinking about in terms of building community partnerships, is approaching with intellectual humility. I definitely think of myself still as the small town kid who grew up outside of Birmingham, Alabama, and I try to, even as I'm in a space like Penn State, which is an elite university that I'm still not accustomed to, I try to bring just my life story, my background into these collaborations to be authentic and to approach things with intellectual humility. Appreciate everyone's expertise, that lived experience is expertise, that community knowledge and ancestral wisdom and contemporary wisdom is also expertise as well, and can really add to the types of solutions that we're trying to build. I also think this is one point that I think is not as common in climate science, but sometimes collaboration and partnership requires slowing down. And we are in the midst of a climate emergency, I think. But one of my mentors always says that we need to move at the speed of trust. And I think that that's a really important point. We can't just try to engage communities on our grant timelines if we're academics. We need to engage on the timelines that communities are ready to engage and are trusting. And I think that that is one way to reorient how we're also thinking about partnership and approaching communities as well. Also, I think it's critical to think about the tangible benefits that are actually emerging for communities that we're working with. I think one of the critiques of academia from organizers, and I'm one of them who has made this critique, is that academia tends to be very extractive as an institution when there are community partnerships at play. Academics generally have objectives of their own in terms of their tenure timelines, their grants, their different motivations there that might not always align with community's objectives. And it's important then to actually have dialogue and discussion and harmonize objectives to create and co-design these different types of benefits that you want a project to yield. And I think it's important then to also make principles explicit in how we're building a partnership as well. There's an academic named Max Liboron who runs the CLEAR Laboratory. It's an anti-colonial environmental science laboratory. And they have a whole principle guidebook or handbook to think about how we can make environmental science more anti-colonial, to think about indigenous land relations and what that means for universities, for researchers who have historically gone into land in support of projects of colonization and projects of land dispossession, how we can reverse that, how we can decolonize the university, decolonize relations with communities, specifically indigenous communities. So those are a few points.
Great, thank you. And this kind of reminds me of the conversation Ben and Marcela and I had yesterday around just land and who owns the land and what the governance is. And so I wonder, one thing is I want to make sure, Ben, you get a chance to talk about your work in Baltimore, so maybe I'll start with you, but in the framing of what you're doing there, thinking about some of the systemic and structural barriers that need to be considered when you're doing community engagement, and particularly around, some of the topics that we were thinking about yesterday, and sort of place-based, and who owns the place and what's the governance of place.
Yeah. And so I probably had some remarks in mind, but this whole conversation has been so usefully distracting, right? To think, just to engage, because so much resonates in what everyone's been saying. And so as you mentioned, so we're doing a lot of work in Baltimore now, which has been interesting for me because a lot of my earlier career was working internationally across communities and thinking about justice and just engagement across some pretty deep geographic or long geographic divides. And now working so closely in communities right next door, in communities that I've lived in, has been really a valuable experience. And as you say, I think that what we're trying to do in our approach is really co-generate from the beginning, right? So there's a real sovereignty of the data, sovereignty of the place, sovereignty of the ideas with the community partners. And I think that when we think about that process, kind of start to finish co-generation of knowledge, which is really not just a principle, but it's a necessity, because our project, the Baltimore Social Environmental Collaborative, is designed with the idea of creating climate resilient solutions that forward equity. And you really can't do that unless it's co-generated. I mean, it's not just that like you have to do this because it's the right thing, or you have to do this because you don't want to just be extractive, you want to support. I mean, that's all true, but you're doing it because it fundamentally doesn't work, right? Like if you climate change demands robust solutions, and robust solutions only come out of co-generation, really generate from place-based knowledge. And so in doing that, I think that the most fundamental thing is working with communities on their priorities, and really priorities being plural in the sense of not just, they have these several climate priorities, but they've got these objectives for themselves, for the youth in the communities, for the elders in the communities, and where are they trying to go with that? And so that leads to just really, I think, just engagement that's just human, right? I mean, I think that's fundamentally what all this just comes down to. It's like, just be normal. You know, like, work with people as people. And this is really a human problem fundamentally. And so it's been a useful process, I think, to really get into it. And when I say get into it, I mean to use that phrasing because part of being human is allowing for conflict and allowing for the fact that, you know, when you go into being at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, it's like, it's not even like people will find out you're extractive, right? It's like, fundamentally, you're a predatory institution, right? And it is a predatory institution. The entire structure is built in a predatory way. Okay? And so recognizing that and moving and trying to move beyond that, but also recognizing there are limits to how far you can move beyond it, right? And that everyone comes to this with their own challenges, with their own conflicts, I think has been really essential. And so to have those kind of private conversations and sometimes public conversations where there's, you know, argument, where there's debate, right, where people get passionate about these things, is part of establishing that human connection that leads to, we hope, transformative change. And it's interesting to, you know, that the mantra of moving at the speed of trust is so true. And also, communities want to move fast, right? I mean, like there's an urgency, and so it's a tough balancing, as I'm sure you're aware. Like on the one hand, it's like, yeah, you don't want to move in on your grant time horizon, and also it's like, boy, are we a slow bureaucracy, and boy, does it take forever to do anything, right? And these communities are like, they're tired of it, right? And so trying to sometimes push your own pace to meet theirs, and so aligning in terms of time, as well as learning in terms of principles, has just been a great learning experience. And so that was a messy response, because I think it's that, you know, wicked problems demand messy solutions, and I think that we're learning this as we go.
Yeah. And I think, you know, this is exactly what came out in our conversation with Marcela. One other thing I would add to that question when you're giving your response would be, how would gatherings like COP possibly dismantle some of these barriers, these structural and systemic barriers, or if they do at all, or maybe they build them more?
Yeah. So I want to go back to something that you said, Ben, which is, first, the projects need to respond to the local environmental priorities. And there is a need to engage in the process from the beginning in the co-creation of what are some of the research questions that are relevant for the communities where we work. So part of the work that we have been doing to start any project is starting with a sort of listening tour and engaging with the community-based organizations, the government agencies, at the national and at the regional level, identifying some of the needs for capacity building, and then based on this, building the opportunities to bring something to the territory that's complementary to the capacities that exist there. And in this partnership with the local communities, I think on one side that guarantees that the community eventually appropriates of these processes in time, and that they continue in time after an institution like MIT leaves the project. But then there's also the need and more work to continue, also as some of you already mentioned, integrating the scientific and the technical knowledge with the local knowledge of the communities. And this is also part of what guarantees the success of these projects. And I wanted to bring an example from our work in Mocoa specifically in this case, because in partnership with the MIT Lincoln Laboratories, we have been producing very advanced machine learning models to detect landslide susceptibility. But these models are only as good as the input data that we're giving them to train the models and to be able to detect these landslide risks. And to collect the data, we have been working with community pilots and training them into the flight operations. But then they are the ones who are providing the inputs, for example, of where to fly these drones to, how to access some of the higher parts of the mountains that have this systemic lack of data that is part of the reason why they haven't produced resettlement plans or models for this city that was 40% of the city was destroyed in 2017 for the landslide. So I think it's really in this integration between the local knowledge, the scientific knowledge, even the ancestral knowledge, that we can start advancing some of these priorities in ways that are going to be sustained in time.
One of the things I've been thinking about is, we're talking about the process, the community engagement process, but I've been talking to each of the speakers about, what does success look like if you do things differently? And so I just wanted to open that up to anyone who might want to answer that question if you have an immediate thought, to sort of talk about if we are doing things differently, what could we create as a result of that? Should I call on someone? Joyce, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. The youngest. Yeah. So basically, yeah. Well, I was thinking on that, and actually during these negotiations, during these days, and the conversations, especially when we talk about like energy transition, right? Because it's been a big topic for COP, tripling renewables, doubling energy efficiency. But okay, how that translates into policies, into innovation. So I have heard all about like several technological innovations from material science as well from different kind of policy innovations, but innovation is also can be social innovation, cultural innovation, and how we also leverage the message and the action from what, the document on the 12th of December, even if it will say phase out, hopefully, or phase down or whatever, but how we catalyze the action. And I think we really need more social innovation. And just examples, I'm going to give you one that really struck me as well during pandemics. In Brazil, in the favelas, as well, there was a lack of governance, and people also experienced a lot lack of water and primary services. And then there was a solar cooperative that was born. They are called Revolu Solar, and they created a very simple business model on solar cooperatives in the favelas. And right now, it has created an environment of innovation, especially ancestral knowledge, and as well like Quilombola knowledge, which is also like the African Brazilian knowledge into energy transition. What do they mean and what do they want about energy transition? So kind of those models also really count into innovative ways, and I think there is still a lack of talking about them, and how, as well Marcela said, ancestral knowledge, right? We think that indigenous knowledge or ancestral knowledge is something from the past. However, it's been something that has been resisting for 500 years, and nowadays people and academics are looking at things like amunas, right? Water cultivation, like in the Andean methods, and some other ways of cultivating and handling water. So I think let's look upon as well this kind of innovative approaches, policy, and from my side that will be that, and also how we exchange practices, and we save time as well. I mean, I'm kind of worried because we see the results of the global stockation. Next year we're going to have as well NDCs, the new NDCs submission, but then we are almost more than halfway towards the NDCs. The SDGs. And SDGs, for example, like SDG 7, we are not on track. Still, we have 940 million people without access of electricity. So that is a big challenge. And we still have, there is a study that says a couple of days before starting COP, says that we still have 15% of reaching still sticking to the 1.5 increase of temperatures, when the current trajectory with including Paris Agreement and this is projecting an increase of 2.5 to 2.9 Celsius degrees. So I think there is an emergence of catalyzing as well social innovation.
Great. Anybody else have a thought about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think success is diverse, right, and it's an ongoing process. I would say that one specific thing that stuck with me in recent conversations is speaking to some folks that we work with the community who have incredibly deep place-based knowledge. I'm learning from them every time I talk to them. And yet they say that, they've started engaging with researchers or scientists, and they'll be out in the community. And when they're out there talking to kids, the kids always look to the formal researcher when they ask a question. And I think one form of success is for that to stop happening. And so we're working a lot to try to make sure that authority, that perceived authority is translated through the process. And I think a lot of other successes come along with that.
And Mark, I think you said mainstreaming young people's perspectives is what success looks like. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, I think that's one element of it, I think, definitely. I think also one sign of a successful project for me is just continuation. I think that there's a term called parachuting. I think that's often used to describe how academics often engage with communities, parachuting in and then leaving when the grant is over, when the project's over. And I think that one sign of success for me is if a community partner says, hey, I would love to continue this collaboration and seek another grant and expand this in different ways, that that process of partnership can lead to different avenues and different pathways, and that to me is one of the key signs of success.
Great. Sergey, you and I were talking on the way over about, we've talked a lot about a community engagement part, but part of that process is to be able to take that information and then being able to couple it with what the government needs and how it can actually be paid for. Can you talk a little bit about that process?
Fantastic. Yes, I think that's an extremely important connection, because that's exactly what we need. We need these local projects with local knowledge, which we can then bring to policymakers who can make a lot of things happen with the right decision about financing, the right decision about adaptation, the right decision about mitigation and energy transition. And indeed, that's what we need to bring to policymakers, because they need to understand, well, yeah, you have done this project in this particular location, but what does it tell to me when I'm making decision? And again, I'll bring example of Bangladesh, where, well, how to bring that information from those 3 locations to the decision making at the whole level of Bangladesh, because they can easily rechannel the funding, they can easily rechannel investment, but they need to have a good justification why and what are the benefits and what are the costs. And this is where, again, the success is where we need to start realizing that, yes, we need to do a lot of action in terms of reducing emissions, but also we need to realize more and more adaptation is critical, right? So, well, yeah, this is the COP, where this is where negotiations are happening, but we cannot negotiate with nature. Nature goes its own way. And so it means that we need to make sure that we are doing something where we are adapting. And that's a key where we are saying local, because, well, the mitigation is more or less we know. Well, we know that we need to change technologies. We know what to do at kind of the country level or global level. But all adaptation actions are local. And, well, by nature. And so as a result, we need to be very, very creative. And this is where, kind of coming back to what's the definition of success, is where you can actually bring that, generalize, bring it to policymaker and tell them, okay, well, these are the options. This is what you can do. This is how you can help. Just to give you a couple practical examples. So, for example, we are working with some entity in the US which is called Congressional Budget Office. And so, well, we are providing them, well, what are the implications of different actions? So if you're in the US, everybody knows the abbreviation IRA. And, well, that stands for Inflation Reduction Act. Well, which actually has little to do with inflation or inflation reduction, but it's a lot of policies which are going to help to decarbonize the US. But the impacts are going to be very, very different in different societies, in different local communities. And as a result, we need to show them, well, what is the best way how to do these policies to make sure that the, for example, energy community is not negatively affected, right? Or they have some other options. Or where we know that those who are most going to be affected by increase in energy prices, they have the good compensation, or there are schemes how to help them. And this is where I see our bringing knowledge to policymakers and their desire to listen to us is extremely important. I can give you another example. Last week we were talking to the US Senate Congressional Budget Committee, where kind of they were interested in our work, where we designed exactly that. How to make sure that, well, we are bringing the environmental justice, how to make sure that they can quantify who is going to be mostly affected. Is it like single parent with children or retired, and how to create some policies to make sure that we are bringing that because after all, you need the support from all segments of a society to continue the policy, because if the policy is not supported by the general public, well, the policymakers are going to have trouble. So it means that you need to design wise policies where you are compensating those who are in need, and also trying to design a lot of flexibilities, because again, all adaptation are going to be local. And so this merger, this trying to understand how to bring these two pieces together is extremely important, and the academic institution like ours is, I think, very well positioned to give that advice to policymakers, not just in the US. I just gave you an example from the US, but we're also working with other entities, other governments, where we are helping to also make these wise choices all over the world.
Yeah, and I recognize we don't have policymaker perspective up here, but I just wonder if there is an opportunity to kind of bridge the gap between communities and policymakers in academia, or if, does that bridge the gap at all, or is there, or would those conversations have been happening anyway?
Well, maybe to also talk a little bit about that is that one of the signs of success for us was we came here to present the results of two of the projects that I shared today, and we as MIT were working as facilitators in these events, and it were the community members who were presenting even the more technical components of the projects that we were talking about. Then they were the ones talking to the Minister of Environment of Colombia about how these projects needs to continue, and not just continue, but expand into other areas of opportunity that they identified. And the specific example was that with the data that we are collecting at this point, we know that we can also monitor not just landslides, but then start to look into other indicators as the degradation of the forest, the structure of the forest, because we're collecting this data that is detailed. So the community members were the ones bridging this gap with the decision makers and the policy makers, and saying this is the type of projects that we want to implement in the regions, where we're like partnering between academia, the local government, and empowering the local communities to take part on these decisions.
That's great. So we have about a half an hour left, and I wanted to give the audience a chance to maybe ask any questions if there's anybody out there that wants to engage in the conversation. Yeah, up front here.
Yeah, just a quick question. I work with federal agencies on evaluation of a lot of these kinds of projects, and there's a lot of really interesting process information here in terms of how you're coordinating these relationships between academia, community, policymakers. Are you sharing, I think a lot of institutions, other academic institutions, community-based organizations, evaluators like myself, would really love to see some models come out of this that might cross your programs. In addition to the impacts that you're making at the community levels, are you sharing, creating models for these research practice community partnerships that could be scaled to other environments as well?
Well, I can start. Well, you see my title. It's MIT Joint Program on Global Change, and so part of what we do is exactly what you are describing, where we are trying to work with international donor organizations, well, other entities, where we are helping them with process and decision-making tools. So I'll give you another example. We are working with an entity which is called Millennium Challenge Corporation. So those of you who are not familiar, it's one of the US entities, development aid entities. So what we do with MCC currently is we are creating a tool for their process where they go to a country. So each year they decide on several countries where they're going to make a decision about the investments, about how to help them to grow, how to eliminate some barriers to grow. So what we are bringing, we have a long-term project with them currently. We are going to create a publicly available set of tools to introduce the impacts on the economy of their decision about the investment, and the dimension which is very relevant to what we are talking about, because they don't really know how to address climate. They don't really know what decisions, because it's all about their immediate investment, a kind of immediate return or immediate reaction. So, but to bring climate in a sensible way, what are the economic impacts of the climate change, it's not a trivial task. And so what we are trying to do, we are trying to quantify and give that tool to them, so that later on they can do their own decision, their own assessment. So that's just one example where we wouldn't be able to do it for everybody, but we are trying to create tools and put into public domain that somebody is going to make much more informed decision making.
Any other tools or frameworks?
Maybe just really quickly. So first of all, putting on my AGU hat for a second, I think this is part of what motivates things like the Community Science Journal and the Thriving Earth Exchange Inventory, because we really want to learn from this, and having a society translate across projects is really critical. Taking off my AGU hat, so they aren't blamed for what I'm about to say, first of all, for our project in Baltimore, this is central to the entire process, is documenting the process of what we're calling our equitable pathways approach to co-generation of knowledge. So we absolutely want to see that scaled and hope that feeds back through the federal program that funded us. And the second thing I want to say is that money matters. So if we're going to talk about like how these things are funded, right, and how they're structured, I've got my ways of getting money to these communities, right? Like, it's not formally often allowed, right? The way these things are done, they're built in a way that assumes that the benefit to the community is that they receive knowledge, and that they are not necessarily supported in the way that the formal researchers are supported. And so programs that recognize that this is a two-way exchange of value, and that there's actual like real money associated with that value is really important, and a lot of programs are not properly structured to allow for that.
Yes, right here. Oh, sorry. Sorry, I guess she has the microphone, so we'll go for you next.
I can just speak louder.
Okay, go ahead.
There's a mic there.
Yes, yeah, there's some confusion. We'll start here and then we'll go there.
Right. I'm with the Mongolian government and part of the negotiating team in Mongolia. And so we're the ones who's doing the buying of data reports, reporting it to the UNCC. Oftentimes what we see with the local solutions that's being initiated from different grants and funds and at the local level, what we see is that they cannot be reported to the emission reduction or even adaptation action because they're such at the piloting scale that they can't be thought at and future impact are assessed into that inventory databases. And that couldn't be, but it oftentimes from the NGOs and international governmental organizations and all that. And one of the samples that I wanted to bring up is that Mongolian highest emission is from energy and agriculture sector, livestock, a lot of livestock, 80 million for 3 million people. And there were startups that's implementing this renewable energy independent systems and trying to invest that system through voluntary carbon market, right? And they piloted this 5-family system, and then it was successful during one of the air polluting winter season. We have a long winter season, and then. But when it comes to scaling that to national and considering it making a national program at the policy-making level, at the Ministry of Environment and Tourism, it becomes quite difficult because it's more of an adaptation and project where there's not enough money. So one of the missing gaps that we see is that there should be enough evidence from academia to support and confirm the future potential so that we can apply that at the government level to international funds. Right? But without that assessment or confirmation, that project potential just lays there and then done and done. So what are your thoughts on that, and how is there like a channels that small community projects could collaborate for their future potential so the policymakers can take that into action and talk with the Adaptation Fund, GCF, and JEF, right?
Again, I can start and then, I've mentioned our project in Bangladesh, and that's exactly the spirit what we are trying to do there. So there are a couple channels which we are trying to pursue. Well, one of them is exactly that. Try to start with a local level, and then try to quantify if you're going to scale it up. If you're going to scale it up for the whole country or for part of the country, what are the benefits and what are the costs? And you have mentioned that's exactly what we are doing in Bangladesh. We are quantifying if action is not taken, what will be the damage to the economy? What will be the damage for the society? And that's the number which government of Bangladesh can bring and say, okay, well, here's the calculation which is done. So here are the benefits from this project. If somebody is going to provide us additional financing, well, this is the benefits which you are going to get. Or if you do nothing, these are the relative costs which are going to happen. Well, there are a couple of things. You have to have the very established calculation, right, where not only local policymakers will trust, but also international organizations will say, well, yes, that's kind of very unbiased estimate and kind of it's not going one way or another. And so there are a lot of things which needs to be satisfied in terms of building the trust, but that's one of the way how you communicate, well, if you're going to scale, what are the implications, what are the benefits, and how much funding, international funding, you would need in order to make sure that you are getting there. I also want to bring a little bit, well, you said that you're from the government, right? So whenever you're talking to different ministries, and well, we talk with a lot of different ministries, and I wouldn't name any countries not to get into trouble, but you can go and talk to the Ministry of Environment, and you will hear one story, right? Or you can kind of then go to Ministry of Energy, you are going to hear a slightly different story. And then you go to Ministry of Finance, and they'll say, oh, no, forget about that. No, we don't have money, we have... So you also need to make sure that internally you need to establish, well, what is needed, right? Because no money is going to come from the air. Well, it's not magic. So you need to have a very persuasive case in order to persuade not just your Ministry of Environment, who is typically on your side, but other parties in the government. And again, the way how to do that is through bringing them quantification, the balanced quantification where you can justify, well, whatever the benefits or costs. And even then, you're not done. Even then, it's still a lot of political goes back and forth. But I think that's the way to go, where you're trying to stay neutral and just show, look, well, here are the benefits which you are going to get out of that. And so that's how to begin the conversation.
Anyone else have a comment on that one?
I was just analyzing a little bit from the optics of perhaps as well funding and changing good practices. I'm just going to tell you just an example. I'm also working with the Youth Climate Justice Fund. And also we have created, if you Google it, a climate justice map, like from changing good practices with youth and what we're doing with climate justice. And we got actually to mobilize some, like as well, philanthropic support by showing, hey, this is what we're doing. You know, we're not just protesting, but we're from the protesting to the proposal. And it has been a good way as well at COP to show as well to negotiators, to several stakeholders, and to build partnerships. So I think having as well certain platforms to showcase what is being done is fundamental. And yeah, that will be from my side.
Good afternoon. So my name is Nadia Hannot. I'm from the European Disability Forum. And I was just going to ask, 50% of the world population are persons with disabilities. And very often, when here you speak about co-developing, we call it in the disability movement co-production, to shift a little bit of power and give it back. So I was really wondering, within your tools and within the statistics, how can we ensure that persons with disabilities are also part of the communities that you're collaborating with? Because for the moment, policymakers does not give the right praise and financing on association of persons with disabilities, and they always come with the excuse about cost effectiveness. So how can we be sure that those who are the most impacted by climate crisis are not left behind? Thank you.
I don't want to steal the show, but I think that's you are raising very, very important question. And so despite what I've said about all the quantification, cost, benefits, and other things, in some cases, that doesn't apply. In some cases, you just need a regulation. You just need to say, well, this is the segment which we need to protect, which we need to engage, which is the segment which is done by regulations. And the way how to do that, to make sure that your policymakers are aware of that, that you are bringing that into the attention. And I recognize in different parts of the world, it's very, very different issue and very, very difficult to promote. And while whatever the solution might be for the US, it may work very, very differently in some other country. But I think that's the way to go, that there are some segments of society we just need to pay attention and we need to make sure that we engage in them. And I think that's exactly what we need. We just need to hear those voices and bring them again and again and again. It's not going to be heard first time. I don't think it will be heard the 5th time. But if we keep bringing that, at some point, that is going to bring the solution.
Well, also at the local level, it's integrating those criteria by design. So in some of the mechanisms that we're engaging communities, for example, is a community researchers network. And it's also making sure that in this network we have representatives from the different communities that are present in the region where we're working, and particularly those with, who have been historically marginalized. So that's another way to integrate them into these processes.
Question here in the middle.
Do we have a mic?
Yeah, she's bringing it.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lindsay, and I am from Vermont in the United States, and I'm a member of an organization called TWIN, which is Transboundary Water and Cooperation Network, and it's a collaboration that works with providing a forum for about 8 river basins who can share best practices around water management. I'm also a master's student, and I'm studying the nexus of hope and climate change and efforts around cultural diplomacy. So my questions are, how do you think leveraging storytelling can help promote regional approaches towards climate change solutions? Because we heard a lot talking about solutions based at a local level, but what does it mean to be local? What are the boundaries around locality and who defines those? Because we also talk about humans as like anthropogenic actors or state actors, but really having like a regional approach is something that, in my opinion, is really necessary towards working towards the climate crisis, particularly when it comes to water. So, and we also limit our capacities to these stories we tell about our own roles. So how can we act by seeing ourselves in the other to build collaborative solutions?
Mark, I wonder, is that something you want to take?
Yes, I love that question. As both a geographer and someone who works in a youth storytelling lab, I think storytelling helps us reimagine our connection to space, connection to time, connection to nature in many ways. And I think it's an incredibly important way of rethinking our relationships across different scales. So yes, much of the adaptation, much of the work that needs to be done is local, but it's also connects to different senses of region, senses of place, different territorial ideas and territorial connections as well as ecological connections. And I think that storytelling element helps us think about these things in different ways that aren't just, well, I think it's also important to think about so much of climate science can also be thought of as storytelling in a certain form. There's a particular story of time, of urgency that happens, a particular tense of urgency that happens, that's also a form of story. There's a great paper by Kyle White, an Anishinaabe scholar, who talks about indigenous science fiction as storytelling and some of this ancestral knowledge of indigenous science fiction and dystopia as part of this storytelling tradition that's been a way of reframing how we respond to climate change. So I think it's incredibly critical to place storytelling on an equal plane as academic research and to be integrating those forms of knowing as well.
Go ahead, yeah.
Hello, my name is Agustina. I'm from Paraguay, and I'm working on adaptation and mitigation projects. Okay, problems, right? And I'm part of the Youth Network for Climate Action, and I have a question regarding research, because in Paraguay we are actually one of the countries that invest the least of their money in science, just 0.60% of the whole money of the country. And actually research in university is not there. So how can we do to motivate the students to involve themselves in this? Because many of the things that we do as young people is volunteer. So we are supposed to have the time to work, to volunteer in what we want to do, to study, to do many things. And today I heard one of my fellow colleagues saying that she is in the climate change fields because for her it was a necessity, but for me it was a privilege because I had the time to wait until someone gave me a job in climate science and climate change. But many of my colleagues in Paraguay, they rush to find a job so they can pursue their actual dreams, for example, science or climate change projects. So what can we do? How can we motivate them, give them a space? Thank you.
I want to leave everybody to answer because I work with Agustina. Like she's assuming my responsibilities in Paraguay, and we have that question. So please jump into it. Like, you wanna go ahead? Yeah.
Well, I think to respond to that, I think so much of young people's labor is undervalued, and I think that those of us in positions to move finance flows really need to be thinking about how we pay young people for every step of the way and how we compensate young people for their labor, for their social change work, for the work that they're doing in what we call in academia DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So much of that work, at least in the university context, is done by our students. They are creating the spaces of belonging, the spaces of social change that happen on our campus and really moving campuses forward in a lot of ways. So one way that we're experimenting with doing that in the lab is trying to budget in any of our grant proposals that we write, youth consultants, youth researchers who we can actually pay for their labor on the project. And also that can be part of a mentorship program as well, where they're working with our lab members, with our students in collaboration, and also having those access to resources. I think the Youth Climate Justice Fund is also an amazing project as well. It's kind of peer-to-peer financing, and I think scaling that up is going to be a question of how much kind of these adult-led philanthropies are willing to partner and really put the finance where they can actually access youth. And I think that one example that I'll point to is the Loss and Damage Youth Coalition recently partnered with the Philanthropy Climate Justice Resilience Fund. They've been part of a participatory grant-making model to support youth-led approaches to the loss and damage question. So I think that is one way of thinking intergenerational partnership in the youth finance space, getting young people paid for their labor.
Other thoughts? Do you have one? Go ahead.
Oh, you can go ahead.
Well, sorry, I'm going to take moderator privilege for 1 second, just to say that there's another avenue you could possibly take, and that is that going into the private sector, for instance, you could, as a group who have a platform, you could really encourage the private sector to not marginalize jobs that might foreground DEI or sustainability or climate action within the companies. So for instance, there's a way to say that a lot of sustainability and climate efforts within the private sector tend to be sort of a bolt-on to your actual job, and people end up working extra hours to do those jobs. But if you had a commitment from the private sector and from management to say, if you do want to work on these things, it will be part of your job. It won't be something that you'll have to do after hours. It may allow people who want to pursue something that may be more traditional to also include something that might, follow their passion. So we have been seeing that certainly in the U.S. with sort of workforce development, and the fact that our workforce are, that there are a lot of people who want jobs that are more focused on climate and DEIJ and justice, and by demanding that their job include those functions, it's changing the hiring structure. So a longer solution takes a lot more time to get companies to come on board, but just another thing to add to your long list of things that you are doing as an activist. Go ahead.
Maybe just to complement that with a public sector response. So I don't know how one fundamentally changes the country's spending habits necessarily, but one thing I would say is that when we talk about funding for science in the United States, and coming here from AGU, I mean, that's one of AGU's big roles, is to advocate for science. It's a traditional way this is done, and how do you do that? You point out all the societal benefits, et cetera, et cetera. And I think what we're recognizing now is that there's a tremendous complementarity between that kind of advocacy and the subject of this panel, right? This idea of co-developing local solutions, because who's championing an investment in science? If it's just a small cadre of scientists who feel that they know the benefit and who personally benefit because it creates career paths for them, that's a special interest group. If it is society, because communities engaged in the research, and so that with the funds that are available, it becomes something that is participatory in a really broad way, then you've got a coalition, right? And then ultimately, again, countries are all different in who gets to make the decisions, who holds power, but ultimately the more people engaged in the enterprise of science, the more likely it is that leaders will see a reason to invest in that.
Other questions? Yes, go ahead over there.
I think we have Mike there.
Oh, sorry.
My name is Cho from Thailand, and I spent early year on the ground, just like your daughter. I strive for action, so I relocated to Golden Triangle and living with the community and try to create alternative livelihood for ex-drug trafficker. And in recent years, I started seeing the impact of climate change really piling down on us. For example, like dust particle PM 2.5 or like shifting season that reduce the production by 90% in the worst years. And I just feel like it's really out of my hand and out of my knowledge to combat these issues. So my question is, how can I and my community start initiating conversation with the knowledge part and, start co-developing solutions?
Well, since you mentioned my daughter, I feel like I need at least to start responding. Well, Deb Campbell, who is sitting next to you, so she is thinking a lot about the questions what you just raised, and because in that project in Bangladesh, this is the same question which farmers are asking. Look, rice productivity is changing, water is getting more saline, so what do? We already impacted, we already feel that. Tell us, and that's exactly kind of the point where we are trying to see, well, is it different crops? Is it different agricultural products? Or is it just moving? So there are a lot of actions, and each of them has a lot of very, very different consequences. So I wouldn't be able to give you, okay, well, this is what you do, because, well, that definitely will require kind of a careful thinking. Well, what is the boundaries of the issue which you are dealing with? But that's exactly where you need to be looking, and that's the point of what is called adaptation clinic in that Bangladesh project, is to look ahead, because you're saying, oh, we already impacted, but we are not at that level, and well, we are going to experience more and more extreme events. We are going to experience a lot of bad things happening more often simply because of the climate inertia. Right? Even if we are going to be successful and tomorrow COP will declare, okay, we have done all the negotiations, the climate is not going to immediately react because we already put so many things into the atmosphere that actually all these negative things which you are describing are going to stay for a while, and they are going to be even worse. And so that's exactly, try to understand how much worse. At what point I need to change my decision? At what point I need to think what are the alternatives? And again, it's not going to be one answer fits all, because we really need to understand the conditions. But again, I encourage you after the meeting, talk to Deb.
I would like to also compliment on that answer, and it's like, I'm just reflecting upon as well how I stutter, and I'll answer like pretty much like collective intelligence. I remember it was my first year as well in uni, and I was feeling kind of alone, especially like being a migrant, in the way that, okay, how we can, mobilize and really make the change. So I can tell you like a couple of things. So first, partnerships, like the municipality, also like private sector, universities are key, like as well instruments for that. And also I remember, I'm just gonna tell a little bit how it started. I literally went knocking on the doors of Itaipu, which is the hydroelectrical plant, and asking, where is your social and environmental responsibility investment in youth? I don't see it anywhere. And they were like, all right, let's build it together. It was very challenging not to fall into tokenization or youth washing as well, but to also be aware that they were part of one out of many partnerships we could develop. And that taught me as well to co-create the first binational and transboundary youth movement in Latin America for water security, which was inside the binational youth movement of the Paraná Basin #3. And afterwards, what we did in 27 cities of the Paraná state from Brazil, we trained youth capacity building processes in climate change, in citizenship, as well in sustainability. And we were working with local governments, as say, training youth, but also positioning that youth in decision-making places. And we won actually the UN best practice for inside the cultivating good water in 2018. And then afterwards, it created a movement. And even though I'm not there now, like at the grassroots movement, things still are happening because there is a legacy, and because honestly, like studying collective intelligence perspectives and methodologies, perhaps as Mark says, even indigenous futurisms and ways on how to operationalize a movement and a perspective is really important. So that will be from my perspective. Yeah, thank you.
I think we have time for one more question, and then we'll just wrap it up. So Shiv, you have the mic.
I think we also have the mic.
Okay.
Oh, there are 2 mics.
Go ahead. Well, maybe we could do 1, 2, and then wrap it up. Oh.
I'll be very quick. So, this question is for Joyce, and of course, one person on the panel. As a person who has tried to help a community and seen the incapability of an individual to make a difference, and as a person who tried to advocate for policy change and saw policymakers respond to PR more than the need, if I can be as cynical as to say, like, what is that thing that you would push for? Does the end justify the means of trying to push for a noble cause in your eyes to others? And how would that look like? Is there a common, let's say, thread that you pull on every time you engage with somebody who's like a stubborn policymaker or a greedy investor to try and get through your cause as to why they should help you?
Wow. I mean, this is the last panel I'm speaking at COP, then focusing on negotiations, but that question was very, very intense, like in the way that I have been reflecting upon that. And I can tell you, like, perhaps something very personal, since I've been appointed as well as my role advising Secretary General. And we have been reflecting with Agustina, some doors, especially governmental doors, are closed. Well, I'm going to say in Paraguay, honestly, because before we kind of used to have more I've been very vocal about certain things, like the former Minister of Agriculture is a big climate denier. And then it's like, okay, you know, exactly as you were commenting, like Paraguay, 7 million people, 20 million cows. Like the focus is food, production. And then you see also information and the position as well of the country. I mean, we have done a lot advanced, but also, especially in Article 6, which is carbon credits, we need to have a full perspective of land ownership, like respecting indigenous lands and all of this, but we don't see this reflected on the proposal of the carbon markets in the country. And I have been very open about speaking this, and even my family were like, Joyce, watch out, decrease a little bit because probably it's too much and probably they are not used to that. And I have seen that the way that we have communicated with them has been also like close. And even I got a little bit disappointed in the way that even we were requesting accreditations for the climate movement, and they weren't given to the youth from climate movement. Also, they weren't given for indigenous peoples. So then we were talking as well with my colleagues. Maybe, it's, from my perspective, it's strategic to set back, and obviously we are allowing other leaderships, because the time when a climate movement and you are an image, that is not then a climate movement. So I just want to be one of them, but I do not represent the full youth, especially in the climate movement. And I'm also aware that it's not going to be easy, and we were commenting with some colleagues that were like, okay, which country is also open to work after my role? Is it Brazil? Is it Colombia? They are really open to work with me. But every decision as well that you take, and it is, as Antonio Guterres said, as the first day we were meeting with him, climate change is political. Climate change is geopolitical. You need to be aware about historical constraints, about there aren't things that are a coincidence or just, but you need to really understand the flux. And there are uncomfortable truths that sometimes you will have to say, and not everybody will open doors for you, but the point is that you also have to see what is perhaps the most beneficial for your group, for your community, for youth movement. Yeah.
So I'm recognizing that we're actually out of time, and so unfortunately we're not going to get to the last couple of questions, but I wanted to thank all of the panelists for your contributions, for helping us understand how to engage better, giving us ideas on actual models and stories that we can tell to show success, and I look forward to hearing about all of your projects going forward. Thank you very much. It's a lot of people. Thank you, you too. Thanks for participating. Thanks for coming. Thank you.